Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show. Today, bringing another really fascinating guest involved in creating a better tomorrow for many people out there. Today, we have the honor of being joined on our show by Dr. Mirza Rahman, who is the president of the American College of Preventive Medicine, a professional community. It was founded back in the 1950s, originally for board-certified physicians to network, ultimately share their experiences and advocate for the advancement of prevention in medicine. And today, the organization represents a couple thousand physicians, medical students, non-physicians, as well as other partners, all that believe in the importance of preventative medicine in society. Dr. Rahman also serves as Senior Vice President of Patient Safety and Pharmacovigilance at a really cool company called Cybin, which is involved in novel second-generation psychedelic drug development. He's also an adjunct Associate Professor of Epidemiology at Columbia University, Adjunct Associate Professor, University of Guyana, and he also is the co-founder and president of the Guyanese Diaspora charity. Most recently, Dr. Rahman served in several roles in the pharmaceutical industry, including as VP and Chief Safety Officer at Organon, as Senior Vice President, Chief Global Pharmacovigilance Officer at Otsuka, and he's also been at Merck as the Executive Director of Clinical Risk Management and Global Safety, as well as at J&J as Worldwide Vice President for Health Economics and Reimbursement Strategy. So he focuses on ortho-clinical diagnostics, broad expertise, needless to say, in a variety of areas. It is public health and general preventive medicine residency, along with family medicine residency at Stony Brook. He did his doctor of medicine degree at Stony Brook University School of Medicine, bachelor's, Sophie Davis School of Biomedical Education, City College of City University of New York. A lot to get into today. A lot of really cool topics. Really looking forward to the discussion. Dr. Mirza Rahman, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Delighted to be here with you, Ira. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, really great having you. I'm looking forward to delving into a range of topics today. I would like to start off, kind of at the beginning, because I noticed before you even wrote your first paper on preventive medicine, and we'll be getting into that in a little bit. Your publication record was quite prolific in just a variety of themes that obviously connect to prevention, everything from colorectal cancer and prostate cancer screening, applications of magnesium and myocardial infarction prevention, proper use of steroids and asthma management. Just take us back a little bit. Talk a little bit about the beginning, just a little bit about your medical history, because I think that alone, before we even get to what you're doing on the preventive medicine front and the pharma industry, is quite impressive on its own.
Thank you very much. It's very kind of you. At the beginning, we'll start in Guyana, because I was born in Guyana, and at around 5 years of age, my grandmother suffered a myocardial infarction. And wandering into the hospital to go visit her, I knew right away that that's what I wanted to do. So I wanted to do medicine. And so coming to America in about 78, I've been here a long time, going to school, 8th grade, high school, college, med school, all in New York. It was focused on family medicine. And then about a year and a half into my residency, I realized I wanted to do something broader. Hence the shift over and the continuation into preventive medicine and public health. So Stony Brook, great university, had both residencies. I was able to seamlessly, after I concluded my family medicine residency, go on and do a public health and general preventive medicine residency at Stony Brook with the legendary Dr. Lane. She was a residency director and still is a residency director, and we all have immense respect for her all around the country and the world. So Dr. Lane took me into her program. I finished that and had done a master's in public health at Columbia. And all of it, as you said, was focused on patient care, but then also with the ability to think about this on a broader level. And hence, going into public health, where I worked as a medical director of a community health center in Long Island, Amityville, and moving over later on to Case Western Medical School, where I was on faculty, both in the family medicine department, teaching residents, seeing patients, and then also in the epidemiology and biostatistics department, the Ireland Cancer Center, putting together a course with a colleague of mine. She and I taught the Cancer Epi course. And then in 1998, being in Cleveland, Ohio, something came across my desk from Merck at the time saying, looking for a physician with epidemiology background. And I go, hey, that's me. And I joined Merck in 98, and I've never looked back. I've really had what I think has been an interesting career where I've done things that I think are important, and I've had a broad reach. Luckily for me, Merck and J&J and Otsuka and Organon and now Cybin have been involved in a variety of things. You talk about the breadth of it. I've been involved in drugs that deal with osteoporosis, to vaccines like mumps, measles, rubella, where we have a measles epidemic in this country currently, to drugs that are used to treat rheumatoid arthritis and psoriatic arthritis, to now where I work at Cybin in a company that is a small biotech working on bringing, as you said, second generation psychedelics to market to meet the unmet need for major depressive disorder and generalized anxiety disorder. And it's exciting because we've just started our phase 3 trial. So looking forward to see how that goes.
Mhm. Again, quite impressive, and I'm going to want to go into each of these areas because, again, what you do and sort of the connection to prevention ultimately is quite impressive. It was at your time, I believe, at Case Western, your assistant professor, and it was in 1996. I think I saw your first paper that you wrote about. This was in the American Journal of Preventive Medicine, July 1996. It's entitled "Training Preventive Medicine Residents to Put Prevention into Practice." And you go into various strategies for including the principles of preventative medicine into a practice, specifically a focus on alcohol, tobacco, and other drug prevention and the issues there. Talk a little bit, take us back to 1996, because clearly to imbue this concept or these principles into the next generation, you have to start obviously during medical school. What was going on in 1996? What was the reception that you got? Take us back to sort of what was happening then, if you would.
Gosh, I was a young fella then, so that's the first thing I think of. And secondly, that was the time of the Clinton administration. What they had done in the Department of Health and Human Services in an office called the Office of Disease Prevention and Health Promotion. Summer of 95, I was in my second year of residency in preventive medicine. And I spent that summer in the Office of Disease Prevention and Health Promotion. Again, another fantastic physician was leading it, Dr. Michael McGinnis. And that is the office where, if you learn anything about medicine in the United States, U.S. Preventive Services Task Force, put prevention into practice. Healthy People Program, you have Healthy People 2030, Surgeon General's report on tobacco. All of that came out of ODPHP, which Dr. McGinnis led. And so I had the opportunity that summer to work there, and they launched a program called Put Prevention into Practice. The former Surgeon General at the time, she led it, and they had this launch. And I was involved in giving lectures all throughout Long Island at nurse practitioner programs, physician assistant programs, because prevention isn't just for physicians, right? You've got to encompass the broad medical community to make sure that we are all thinking about this. And what they were focused on there is primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention. So primary prevention we think of as vaccines. Secondary prevention is screening, and tertiary prevention, you've had an MI or you have arthritis. How do we make sure you can remain functional? So those were the things that they were doing, because the number one reason they found that women did not have mammograms, and this again is some of the work that Dr. Lane did out in Long Island. Number one reason women didn't have mammograms, their doctor didn't recommend it.
Mm.
Now, we know of the evidence, but then the question was, how do you put it into practice?
Right.
And so that was what this program was designed to do. We've now gone much beyond that, from putting it into practice to trying to implement this in a lifestyle medicine way, where we talk about 6 things. And in the lifestyle medicine group, which really started in the ACPM, the American College of Preventive Medicine, it's now burgeoned. They have their own American College of Lifestyle Medicine. And the 6 things they talk about, if you summarize them into one word each: eat, sleep, move, social, substances, and stress. So eating the appropriate food, sleeping appropriately, getting enough sleep. We love these toys. I don't know if you can see it, you can't, but the phones, the screens, right? So eat, sleep, move, exercise. CDC recommends 150 minutes a week. People don't get that in a month. Managing stress. Don't have the beer and sort of sit in front of the TV. Figure out ways for appropriate stress management. Stay socially connected. How do you connect with people? And Facebook and Instagram are not really connecting with people. They're a very superficial way of connecting. How do you really connect with people? And then avoiding the substances. And we all know the ones that we'll think of. Don't smoke, don't drink alcohol, avoid drugs that are, the illicit drugs. We think of cocaine, etc. But let me give you some other substances to avoid or minimize. Salt. We
Mm.
need to decrease our risk of hypertension. Sugar. We need to minimize obesity and diabetes. There are other things we should also avoid. Vaping is one. We'll put that in with tobacco. But the others are cholesterol. And when we think of cholesterol, we think only of meat. But you can be vegetarian and still get too much cholesterol because you're taking too much of cream and too much of cheese and those types of things. So, salt for, hypertension, sugar, diabetes, cholesterol. And, these are the things that will help us to maintain proper body weight. And, the current Secretary of Health and Human Services is focused on chronic disease. Chronic disease is really killing us, and we need to focus on that. I agree. There's some things we may have a difference of opinion, but focusing on chronic disease is vitally important for the long-term well-being of the country. 70%, 7 out of 10 adults in this country are either overweight or obese. That does not bode well for us going forward.
All very important points, and I'm going to come back to them in a little while when we get into the lifestyle medicine component of your organization. Again, before we get there, one other place I wanted to go. I mentioned in the bio your sort of broad experience in pharma. Place I spent a decent amount of time in my career, and I found it quite interesting because aside from the traditional areas that we think about, the clinical development and the manufacturing, regulatory affairs, which we're all involved in, and then these folks over here that are doing all the marketing for us. There's a lot more things that happen in the pharma companies. You've been involved in them, everything from medical affairs, outcomes research, pharmacovigilance. And these are really the things that when you think about how come pharma doesn't do prevention stuff? Well, they do, but it happens in sort of that gray space in between. We don't, yeah, true, we don't run these 10-year clinical trials all the time, but we do have other ways to analyze whether, hey, what's the long-term effect of X, Y, and Z? What are the healthcare costs, the economics involved, and so forth. Talk a little bit about your time in pharma, but in what I'll call the gray zone that maybe we don't
Sure.
talk as much about that we should, but very important area when we want to start thinking about how we study prevention properly.
Sure. So there are a few things to touch on. As we think about what goes on in the world of pharma, there's clearly some negative things associated with pharma. For folks who are a little bit older, they'll remember David Letterman, And David Letterman had an iconic phrase. I don't know if you're a fan of his, but he'd refer to people in a pejorative, money grubbing pond scum. And sometimes
Yeah.
people in pharma are looked upon like that from people who are in the public health industry. We've had enough of folks who work in pharma, who are preventive medicine folks, who now can work and share what they do. And in fact, when I was at Merck and when I was at Otsuka, we developed in conjunction with the American College of Preventive Medicine a 2-year training program, not just for preventive medicine physicians, but also for nurse practitioners, PAs, PhDs, to train them how to do pharmacovigilance. Because in many ways, pharmacovigilance is preventive medicine and public health put into practice. The FDA is there to protect the public health. Internally within a company, the people who work in pharmacovigilance, their sole and highest focus is patient safety. Now, of course, we want to be compliant, but compliance is secondary in the sense that the FDA and other regulatory agencies use compliance as a surrogate for patient safety. So if your compliance is not good, then of course they don't believe you're protecting patients. And that's where folks like myself come in. We in the pharmacovigilance world are looking to protect patients. And we take that seriously, and companies take that seriously. I mean, it is easy to vilify the pharma company and says, oh, all they're interested in is making money. Well, if they produce products that were dangerous, how does that help them? If you just want to say, well, they're only bottom line oriented and they want to make as much money, if you produce dangerous products, that helps no one, including the company. And companies take pharmacovigilance seriously. At one company where I was, there was an issue with a new product that was in development. And I think of new products as babies. Everybody has a baby. They think the baby is beautiful and lovely. And along comes a PV guy like me and says, nah, I don't know. That's an ugly baby. And we're the ones who have to say that because we're looking at the data. You see that this particular drug is causing hepatic problems. You have liver problems. And so you have to go to the CEO and say, this is a dangerous drug and we need to stop development. And they listened, right? There has never been an instance where I have been working in the 27 years where there was something to be added to the label or some caution or precaution or black box, or we needed to stop with the drug development, that senior leadership has not been supportive because they look at the long term. What is in the best interest of the company? And producing safe and effective drugs is what is in the best interest of the company. And so when we work in pharmacovigilance, we're putting into practice all the things we've learned in preventive medicine and public health.
Right.
Similarly, I worked at Merck in manufacturing. I was the head of product quality complaints there. And that's where things, when they go wrong, everything from having bugs in bottles of pills, or there's a mix up, there's a green pill that should have been in the red pill bottle, or vice versa. That's where you have to go in and delve into what happened, how did this happen, and how do we prevent it from happening? So it's the broad systems thinking that is important. And that's why people with preventive medicine experience, people with an epidemiology and statistics background and medicine are valued in the pharmaceutical industry.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I appreciate you sharing those points. And I have a buddy from pharmacy school that's actually in pharmacovigilance right now at Merck. So this resonates. So thank you for that. Um, let's talk about ACPM because the mission of the organization is broadly as promoting preventive health care to improve well-being and to prevent disease, disability, and death. Obviously, a very important mission. In addition to the specialty area of what we've been discussing, public health, general preventive medicine, you also have two other very interesting silos. One, occupational medicine, and we've had the opportunity to profile some of the medical directors and companies like Jaguar Land Rover and Pepsi, Chevron, with this very interesting theme that not just prevention, but the fact that the clinician, the medical director at these companies now more than ever, and it's not just because of COVID, but COVID started it. We need that medical director at the table all the time because whether it's a pandemic or whether it's some other problem, we need them there fast, furious, and talking about these issues up front and not in some back closet somewhere where they've normally been kept. So very important, set of topics. And then aerospace medicine, which obviously more and more people going up and to the different levels of the stratosphere. Another really cool area that we don't think as much about, but things get kind of dangerous when you get a couple miles up there. Take us into the organization and take us into these three specialties, if you would.
Sure. Well, the American College of Preventive Medicine was started in 1954, you mentioned in the 1950s. So it's been around 70 plus years. And really, it is a collection of physicians who are focused on prevention, writ broad, right? So you talked about aerospace, occupational medicine, and then general preventive medicine, public health. If we think about general preventive medicine, public health, we have people in three or four broad areas. The first, of course, is they're the people who are working in the government. So the people who've been really impacted by the changes in the new administration. So you've got people on the front lines in clinics. So you've got a colleague of mine who's a board member, Dr. Robert Gilchick. He's out in Los Angeles County and he sees patients, right? You then have additional colleagues who work at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or at the FDA, or at the NIH. So they're doing research, they're making sure food is safe, they're making sure drugs are produced safely. They are the ones working on the epidemics, and we don't think epidemics happen in America, but you've seen what's going on with measles out in West Texas and then more
Right.
broadly across the country. But epidemics occur all the time. We just don't necessarily maybe call them that. Every time you go on a cruise ship, or you hear of a cruise ship being pulled into dock and there's an issue with a norovirus outbreak, that's an epidemic. And we have our friends and colleagues at the Centers for Disease Control who go out and investigate these. We had Gene Hackman who passed away. They were talking about the hantavirus, right? All public
Right.
information. And that really was something that CDC, Epidemic Intelligence Service officers, had discovered back in the 90s, right? So this is the work that preventive medicine public health folks do in the government. If you then move over to industry, a lot of us work in the pharmaceutical industry, but a lot of people also work in industry as physicians, as consultants to various companies. I'll come back to that in a minute. We also have our friends who work in academics.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd worked briefly in academics, but people make a career of that. The former president, Dr. Tonette Croswell Wood, she's an academic in Tulane down in New Orleans. And so she has made a career of that. You've got to teach the next generation if you expect what we do to continue in perpetuity. And that's what we're looking at, right? We want to make sure that we, as the custodians of the American College of Preventive Medicine, can make it stronger and better than it was when we took it over and pass it on to the next and the next and the next generations so that they too can lead. And all of this comes together because we're focusing on the outcome, which is to make America and its population healthier and hopefully at some level happier. So we're talking about the government, we're talking about industry, we're talking about academics. When we talk about occupational medicine, these are the people who work to ensure that there's safety in the workforce. So simple things. How do you sit? What does your workstation look like? Do you need a chair that goes up and down? Do you have a desk that goes up and down? Are you going to be standing? People who are sedentary have an increased risk of heart disease and other chronic diseases. How can we get people moving around? Similarly, if you're working in a manufacturing plant like I did at Merck, their fumes, their noxious gases that are used to produce things, their labs, how do you keep people safe? One of the biggest ways you talked about COVID in occupational medicine was when the COVID pandemic hit. It
Yep.
was those physicians who were in the occupational medicine structure who were able to guide companies to decide, okay, everybody goes home. And if you come back maybe a third of you every third day. And this is how we will do it. We were fortunate when I was at Otsuka. We didn't have an occupational medicine group, but we had the group that was from the American College of Preventive Medicine, these dozen or so physicians and PharmDs, and I put them to work, and we were the internal ACMED consultants for the CEO. We met with him every week for a year on shutting down the company, keeping people separate, having people looking at the air vents, when could sales reps go into certain parts of Pennsylvania or Texas or so on, depending on what the data showed and whether COVID was higher or lower, looking at protective equipment and so on. So we served as that OCMED group internally for the company, but that's what our occupational medicine colleagues do. And
Mm-hmm.
then aerospace medicine, obviously, we have a number of companies run by the billionaires who are going into space. But really, aerospace medicine, if you go look and see who comes in there, it's the Air Force guys and,
Right.
and women, primarily in the Air Force. And that's one of the cool things about the ACPM. We've got a number of people who are in the military, Air Force, Army, U.S. Public Health Service. So these military branches are part of the ACPM, and we value them, we learn from them, and we try to help them as best as can to make sure that what they do is seen and heard and valued. Because in a large, complex organization like the military, sometimes what they do isn't necessarily valued.
Right. Absolutely. No, it's again a rather impressive set of specialties, and I'd like to go into a few of them just because each one is more interesting than the next, or equally interesting, and love to see where you're taking some of this. I mean, one obviously that is front and center nowadays, just because of, I guess, I'm saying how badly we've done in the pharma industry in creating things for or novel therapeutics for dementia. But clearly, this is a big problem. Everyone realizes it. You have a very interesting program within the brain health category entitled Heart Healthiest Brain Healthing, and very interesting to see, obviously, the connections between healthy blood pressure control, as you were mentioning before, and the progression of cognitive decline. I'm very interested in this program. At the same time, some of the other things we've chatted about on the show, I'd love to hear your thoughts and sort of from the comprehensive perspective. Everything from shingles vaccine and the recent paper in terms of reducing dementia risk to low hanging fruit. I talked with the folks at AARP about the fact that when someone doesn't have a working hearing aid, things go downhill much faster than when they have a fresh battery. So there's a lot of things in this continuum, and I just love to put that one on your plate and just hear, sit and listen and enjoy what you're doing on that particular set of programs.
Yeah, no, thank you. As we at the ACPM work, we're looking at things where we can contribute significantly to good outcomes. And you talk about the brain healthy program. Many ways, there are many ways to dementia. And people think of it as we hear the amyloid protein and we need to think about that. Simple things, however, can significantly help. Simple things, however, seem to be hard to do. So
Yeah.
go walking. Okay. When you go walking, the blood flow to the brain is enhanced. You decrease your blood pressure. High blood pressure results in a much higher risk of developing dementia. So if you can manage your blood pressure, if you can get more blood flowing to the brain, you're decreasing your risk of dementia. And so walking decreases your risk of dementia. And that connection may not be apparently easy for people to understand, right? Similarly, for years, the tobacco industry was happy to say, well, it doesn't cause lung cancer and it doesn't cause anything else. And we would learn, even if we haven't elucidated the mechanism, that the number one risk of disease for smoking is heart attacks. People think of lung cancer, but you have more people dying of myocardial infarctions and strokes than you have of lung cancer because of smoking. And that really is something that needs to be understood. And this is what we're trying to do. So it's sort of education, right? Um, but it's engineering fixes at work. In preventive medicine, we think of three E's. There's education, there's enforcement, and there's engineering. Education is you should put on a seatbelt when you drive. Enforcement is if you don't put on a seatbelt and the cops find you, you're going to get a ticket. Engineering would be the car can't start unless you're plugged in. And it's the engineering fixes that work the best. But we have challenges in a whole variety of ways in trying to get those engineering fixes to work. But that's where systems come into place. Okay. And that's what we have as a systemic failure when it comes to vaccines. And we have another program I'll touch on called the Vaccine Confidence Campaign.
Okay.
And this is something that should be a routine in this country, in that we should have vaccines routinely being delivered. And for the most part, we do, but not at the level that we need to have them be done. Because you need about 95, 97% coverage to have that what's called herd immunity. So even if, let's say, you choose not to get vaccinated, or you can get vaccinated because you may have you may have a cancer and you can't get a live vaccine, you won't get the disease because the disease doesn't live in the country, right?
Right.
And what we have, however, is people opting out of getting vaccines. And if you look at the people who have developed measles in this country now in the last 3 to 4 months, it's almost entirely people who are unvaccinated.
Yeah.
So if you choose not to be vaccinated and the rules of public health are not enforced in terms of making you get that vaccine before you go to school, there are all these exemptions, then you're going to have a resurgence of this. And one of the great things about living in the United States for me is I've never seen polio. But growing up as a kid in Guyana, I saw a lot of kids who had had polio. I lived around the corner from a home where people who had had polio were living in Georgetown in Guyana. And I had seen patients with polio. Most physicians in the United States, forget about patients, most physicians in this country have never seen a patient with polio, which is a wonderful thing.
Right.
Except now you become complacent and you go, well, I don't need a polio vaccine. I don't need a measles vaccine. And we will then see a resurgence. The end of the last century, the last millennium, vaccines were voted the number one most important public health initiative. And here we are, 25 years into this century, this millennium, and people are refusing to get vaccinated. And so, at the college, we're talking about a vaccine confident campaign. And then, we have things where we talk about the military. In this country, we have over 6,000 members of the military or who were in the military who died by suicide. This talks about post-traumatic stress disorder. This talks about the fact that we don't have perhaps enough people, therapists, psychologists, physicians, psychiatrists, or appropriate medicines to treat them. And this is what that unmet medical need is that we need to fill, whether it's with the company where I work or others. It's about getting people the therapy they need. And this gets also a little bit to stigma. All these years later, people are still embarrassed that they have depression, or they're embarrassed that they went to war and they came back with some sort of a problem. Whereas nobody's ever embarrassed that their beta cells in the pancreas stop working and they
Right.
have diabetes, right? So this is the kind of thing we still need to get over, and yet it is a problem. So, just three things as we think about it: vaccines, making sure that people see the connection between exercise and brain health, between hypertension and dementia, and making sure that we get the people who need it the help that they need, whether it's in the military or not, but for depression and anxiety and the plethora of psychiatric disorders that exist in the country.
Mm-hmm. And if we can, so I want to come back to the embarrassment and the stigma with regard to the mental disorders, but I want to bring one other piece in here to that let's say a triad, and that's diabetes and sort of the metabolic component here, because just as you mentioned before, even if miraculously the greatest amyloid scavenging antibody showed up one day, it's probably not going to solve the entire cognitive decline dementia problem. And I think we're seeing the similar thing, that while Novo and Lilly are making trillions of dollars on GLP-1s, we still have, the number is staggering how many people in this country alone have pre-diabetes and type 2 diabetes, and something's off, right? And again, low-hanging fruit. Bring in the diabetes prevention angle here, if you would, and a little bit about what you're doing on that front, because I think, again, it's the GLPs didn't solve everything, and we need to keep that in mind based on, this is a $500 billion problem by itself still. So, talk a little bit about diabetes prevention, if you would.
Sure. There have been several initiatives with the College of Preventive Medicine in conjunction with some of the various pharmaceutical companies. And as we look to our annual conference, which is coming up in May, we're going to have sessions that relate to diabetes, and there's some workshops in planning, action planning. How do you deal with these types of things? So I'm glad we have GLP-1s, right?
Yeah,
I'm glad we have insulin for over a century coming out of Toronto, Canada, the university there, Banting and Best. But there's got to be more. People
right,
need to be responsible for their own health. And we also need to understand what the effect is of marketing. So, whether it's sodas, whether it's easy food access to things that are not the most nutritious. And look, I'm as guilty as anybody of having sodas or other things, but we need to be intentional about what it is that we put into our mouths. We need to make sure that as we collaborate, we use all of the tools in our armamentarium. And so while we have the drugs to be used, whether it's the sulfonamides from from yesteryear to the
yep,
GLP-1 now, whether we need insulin or not, thinking again about the easy things that are hard to do. Exercise, manage your weight, get proper sleep. These are the things, that tend to be hard to do, but they may not be seen as vital when in fact they are probably foundational. For example, if you look at any of these drugs, in the label it says with a good diet, maintaining proper weight, and then you use these things. Try 6 months before you go on the drugs.
right,
But instead, whether it's in the statins, whether it's in the medicines for hypertension, whether it's in the drugs for diabetes, we start with the drug and then we move from there. And so people will go out and have their ice cream and take a couple of extra units of insulin because they know they had the ice cream, right? So we don't value the prevention. We always want to do everything that we potentially could, when just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do that thing. And that is a very hard thing for us here in this country because we always want to do more and we think more is better.
right, right. Yeah, excellent point. Um, so one other thing I just wanted to ask about while we're on this theme and coming back to, the nutrition, exercise, rest, and social connectivity, which is sort of, make up sort of the platform of the lifestyle medicine thinking that you espouse on the website. And I've heard you actually talk on. I saw you give there was an interview you gave a little while ago because this area of aging and sort of geroscience the last couple of years has gotten kind of hot, but there's with everything that's scientifically, I guess, correct happening, there's a lot of stuff still out there that's snake oilish and doesn't have the proper data behind it. You were being interviewed about these whole body scans that are, kind of in vogue nowadays. What's going on at the organization regarding your thinking in terms of what we'll call it, health span, geroscience? Clearly, the low hanging fruit of nutrition, exercise, rest, and social connectivity seems to be doing a lot better than any of the magic stuff that is being tried out. But what's the position of the college on where this is all going, and what are you interested in specifically as it pertains to sort of the next generation of healthy aging approaches?
The college is focused on evidence-based medicine.
Yeah,
If we don't have evidence-based medicine, then to the point that I'd made earlier in one of the interviews and you just mentioned, do we all fall prey to the snake oil salesman of this generation, right?
right,
If you look at the old Westerns, if you read about the history of the West from the 1860s and so on, you had snake oil salesmen traveling west and selling magic elixirs. Here, we have people selling technology, whether it's things like body scans, it's injectable products that are perhaps their own mixture. We need to understand what is the evidence. And if something works, the FDA is happy to give you their stamp. They will say, show us two well-controlled, randomized controlled clinical trials that show that body scans are safe and effective. They detect cancers earlier, and you should have this, as opposed to, oh, more is better, right? Similarly, for, injecting hormones or other types of things, yes, you can do it. But getting back to my earlier point, just because you can do something doesn't mean that you necessarily should. Because once a product is approved in the United States, any physician can use it off-label. They don't have to use it in the way. So, growth hormone, for example, for kids who may have some short thing before the plates fuse, they can get an injection. But people use this now to go on the longevity track, right? And so, is there any evidence? And if there is evidence, and you, Dr. Pastor, you've been working in your clinic for the last 4 years doing this, please show us the evidence. Share with us what you have. Because if it works so well, how hard would it be to share the evidence that it works so well? And so that's the challenge that we have. Let's start with the evidence. We also need to teach the next generation and this current group of practicing physicians what it is that they should be promoting and looking to not promote. Because again, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. So, certain things we should not promote, we should actively argue against. Certain things we should actively promote. How do you get from going from talking generally, oh, you should exercise and so on, to say, hey, Mrs. Jones, I know you haven't exercised in the last 4 years. Can I get you to start walking for 5 minutes? Sometimes the impact of a physician on a patient's behavior, asking for something that is eminently reasonable, gets them started. I was in Guyana last year, and there was a gentleman out in the hinterland. There was a place called St. Cuthbert's Mission, far away from the city. And he had been coming in there, alcoholism and significant medical problems. And he basically came in and passed out. We had to drive him about 2 hours to the nearest hospital in an ambulance to with oxygen, get him. And on the way, we thought he had died. He hadn't. And that gentleman now has quit drinking. He's had this sort of spectacular event in a negative way in his life, and that's changed his life. We shouldn't have to wait for that. We should try to do these things that may be considered rather mundane, but will likely have the biggest impact. It's why we ask residents every time they see a patient, ask them if they smoke. Even if you have only a 5% impact on your patient population, think of the disease prevention that you could be engaging in, from heart disease to lung cancer to other bladder cancer to all the plethora of things that will be impacted. And okay, so the other 95 who smoke will continue to smoke, but you've asked and you've counseled them, and that's what you need to do. So it's about evidence, it is about training the next generation, and it is about repeating over and over these simple things while also providing the requisite care for hypertension and diabetes and all the things that afflict us from a chronic disease standpoint that we need to do.
And just while we're on that point and about asking, hey, do you smoke? We just profiled a couple of weeks ago this new program from the Ad Council on youth gun violence, and again the numbers there are staggering. The fact that this is the number one cause of death in this 1 to 17 age range, and this whole principle of, hey, when you go to the pediatrician, and we don't think about this, but yeah, the pediatrician, is there a gun in this house? Do you ever see your daddy's gun? Say a couple words, if you would, just about your violence prevention program there, because obviously this expands beyond children. And again, alongside you asking if someone they smoke, I mean, do you keep your gun somewhere safe? Do you have a gun in the house? Say a couple words of what you're doing there too, because I don't think this can be overstated about how important not just the number of deaths, violent deaths that occur in homes all over the country, but again the number what this means to the United States economy is also quite staggering. And if you could just say a few words, Mr. That'd be great.
Sure. Public health
Yeah,
is deeply intertwined with politics.
right.
And so this then becomes, as it were, a hot potato. But it shouldn't be one where in every year in this country, about as many people are killed with guns than died during the entire Vietnam War. Let me say that again. About as many people in the United States die because of gun violence than were killed in the entire Vietnam War soldiers, right? So,
Right.
so that's the impact or the scope of the problem in this country. And we then get into the why, and that becomes a political hot potato, as it were. And we need to make sure that we view this as a public health problem that we can address as opposed to an intractable political problem. And yes, right now we have challenges in the world of public health. The cutbacks at HHS, about a quarter of the staff are being let go, CDC, NIH, FDA. But this is about looking out for the country, looking out for the kids. You know, we have way too many kids being killed by this. And as we have worked with the CDC on this in the College of Preventive Medicine, we have presentations at our annual meeting. We are, working to try to see how laws by individual members can lobby their senators and Congress people. We need to continue to do this all across the country because every gun manufacturer has significant lobbying power, and they utilize that to continue to have the laws remain as they are. Even after every senseless act of violence that we see, we have these mass shootings, four or more people that's defined as. We have more than one a day in this country. Okay. And we've had that for years. And so you have all of these gun violence, and we see when there's just one in Florida, either earlier this month or last month, and this is something that will continue unless there is a focus. And we don't have that. We don't have the ability right now to fight against the power of the lobbyists. And it may take us a long time, but it's in the good interest of the company over the long term. And more than any other country, we have this history of guns and gun violence, whether it comes out of the Civil War, and then you had the Wild West, and then you have it in the second, it's in the Second Amendment. However you define a militia, the Supreme Court, far wiser than me, has decided that people can have guns. And so here we are.
Right.
But if you have guns, do you need an AR-15? Do
Yeah.
you need a pistol to go target shooting? And this is what is often used to kill, if not a few people, then dozens of people across the country, as we see over and over and over again. Just look it up. I mean, I'm sure you believe what I'm telling you, but everybody doesn't believe me. Just look up the data. It is
Yep.
easy enough to find out. We have more people dying than almost were killed in the entire Vietnam War on an annual basis. This is not 10 years from 65 to 75 in the Vietnam War. It's on an annual basis. And then you have more gun shootings where you have four or more people injured, more than one a day. This should never be acceptable, but it is, and we'll hear the wringing of the hands and thoughts and prayers. But these killings continue unabated.
Yeah, and I had the chance to profile Deb Howery from the CDC a couple of years ago, and as you were saying, that data, anyone can go to the CDC website, it's all there laid out, and it is shocking. And I'll just leave it at that, especially when you break it down by age group and so forth, and some of these new trends. But no, I appreciate you putting that in there, and it's an important piece of what the college is focusing on. Um, let's talk a little bit about Cybin because as I mentioned uh, in the intro, this is one of your many responsibilities, serving as senior vice president of this company, and we've talked a little bit on the show about the quite amazing sort of neuropharmacological aspects of many of these compounds, whether it's psilocybin or ibogaine or DMT, which I know you're working with as well. Take us into the world of what's happening. You're as a pharma development guy, as a pharmacovigilance person. A little bit of what obviously quite intricate, let's say, development process compared to say a blood pressure drug or something like that. And yeah, I just love to hear your experiences and what's happening on this front in 2025.
Yeah, Cybin's a great company to work for. I've been here only 6 months, and we have just started our phase 3 trials, and I'm in charge of patient safety and pharmacovigilance. I like the fact that they didn't just call it the pharmacovigilance department, it's patient safety and pharmacovigilance. So that sure to shows where the mindset is.
Yep.
It is different than developing other drugs, whether statins for cholesterol or alendronate or something like that, bisphosphonates for osteoporosis. You give the patient the drug, whether it's psilocybin or the DMT, and then you have to sit with the patient for about 8 hours.
Yeah.
You want to make sure that any of the effects of the drug are monitored. We actually hire and have therapists who sit with these patients for 8 hours, right? So that's a long time to ensure that the drug, once received, the patients do well and there aren't any adverse events, adverse reactions as we talk about. And if there are, then we have to deal with them. It's not just take the drug and go out the door, right? And so this is what is one of the big differences. And I think as we move forward, there have been some failures. There's another company that had failed with this when they went to FDA. But the persistence in looking in companies like Cybin and others, in looking at psilocybin and other of these second generation psychedelics, is that there's this huge unmet need.
Right.
About a third of patients with major depressive disorder on antidepressants are still not treated effectively. So there is a huge unmet need there. I talked about PTSD in the military in particular, but lots of other people also have PTSD. So working to develop a new product, to bring new products to market to meet that unmet need is what Cybin is doing. And they have to do it in a different way because, as you mentioned, this is entirely different drug development. There's a unique system that we utilize called Embark, where we do have these psychologists, therapists who are working with us, who are sitting with the patients and monitoring them for 8 hours. I can't think of any other group that I've been involved in, and I've been at four other pharmaceutical companies, where that has been a construct within the use and development of a product. So it's really something that is extra. And I think the FDA recognizes that. The FDA granted the company breakthrough designation for psilocybin, which means that you have the opportunity to go meet with the experts and the drug reviewers at the FDA every 6 months. And we were just there down in Bethesda last month and got the opportunity to have that give and take, the feedback of, this is what we're thinking. What do you think? Well, we don't think you should do this, but you can do it in a different way. And I think that give and take is really helpful when you're coming and developing an entirely new product to bring to market. And, the feedback from the FDA is obviously invaluable.
Right.
But it's the promise that they see within the drug that has allowed them to grant breakthrough designation to Cybin as we move forward. So this is an exciting time, not only at Cybin, but I think across the field of psychedelics. And if we can work to bring new drugs to market that will meet these unmet needs in depression or anxiety, wouldn't that be a great thing?
Absolutely, absolutely. And then going back to that whole issue that you brought up at the beginning, the shame, and issues like that when it comes to drug addiction. My mother was, for years, just addicted to benzodiazepines, just because, back in the 1960s, it was, hey, that's what you took to fall asleep or whatever, and
Yeah.
it was an embarrassment for her entire life. I mean, I would love to have, I don't know, but what you're learning about sort of the benzodiazepine withdrawal. I know they've been used in opiate withdrawal and all that, but I'm looking forward to seeing, how this ultimately progresses. So I'm rooting you on with this one, and I'm glad to see that you're already in phase 3. So that's quite exciting. There's one other thing I just wanted to ask about while we have you today, because you do wear multiple hats. Can you talk a little bit about what's up with the Guyanese diaspora organization? Because this is, clearly, I know you get down to Guyana to work in this program. It seems a lot of public health initiatives. I don't know much about Guyana. I had a couple of careers ago when I was in uh, the, uh, the sort of the natural product business. We had some bioprospecting work actually going on next door in Suriname, but that was sort of my closest exposure. What's happening with this organization? Say a few words, if you would.
Sure. Thanks for the opportunity to speak about that. And you're ahead of most people, Ira. When I tell them about Guyana, they usually say, "Oh, isn't it great? Wasn't the UN Secretary General from there?" I go, "No, no, no. That's Ghana in Africa. This is Guyana in South America." So you're way ahead of most people. Back in 22, when I left the company I'd been working for, I'd been in the United States for 40 plus years, and I wanted to share some of what I had been fortunate to get. And Guyana is a country of about 800,000 people. Prior to 2015, it was probably one of the three, four, five poorest countries in the Western Hemisphere, probably in just above Haiti. And it had been that way for a long time. And a lot of people left Guyana. There was a lot of racial inequity. And so you had a minority Afro-Guyanese government from 66 to 92. And then there was an Indo-Guyanese government from 92 to 2015. Then there was a 15 to 20, again, an Afro-Guyanese government. And now it's an Indo-Guyanese government. And that there is the problem, right? It should
Okay.
be a mixture. It should be, let's say, Democrats and Republicans as opposed to based on ethnicity. And I think the current government is trying, but that is still a significant challenge if we're going to be honest about it. But in 2015, something dramatic happened. Oil was discovered, and we
Okay.
became the new darling of many countries, America not to say the least. But then folks like from China and from many other countries were now Guyana's new best friends. And the first oil started being pumped in 2019, and Guyana has now perhaps the fastest growing economy in the world. The challenge, of course, is how do you get those monies all across the country? Still, much of the country is mired in poverty. The government that came into office in 2020 is certainly focused on a lot of infrastructure building, and they're building about a dozen hospitals from then to in the next few years. Um, I have met with the Minister of Health. I've met with some senior officials, and the challenge is, from my perspective as a public health guy, they're enamored with the American system of healthcare. So they're looking to get hospitals that can do coronary bypass and kidney transplants. And so they're focused on tertiary care and the things that will keep the country healthy and well, primary care, preventive medicine. I think don't get enough service, enough resources across the country. And I've had this discussion with the minister, and I think I've had zero impact on his thinking. But that doesn't mean I don't try, right? I'm a
Yeah.
family doc, I'm a preventive medicine doc. This is what I do. And it's sort of, tilting at windmills, as Cervantes wrote. And so we need to continue to do this. And so while I've had almost no impact on the Guyana government, I have had an opportunity to work in and work with the University of Guyana. They've been kind enough, and it only took them about 2 years, but I got an appointment there, and I teach in the School of Pharmacy. I teach in the graduate school. I talk about the things I know about pharmacovigilance, pharmacoepidemiology, pharmacoeconomics, vaccines. I had been on the board of the American Journal of Preventive Medicine. I've written a number of articles, so I've taught that they have a new PhD program in the graduate school that I'm on faculty there. So those are the kinds of things I've been able to do. And then within the family medicine department, because I still continue to teach here in Pennsylvania at Bryn Mawr Family Practice. I've been
Hmm.
a volunteer there since 2004. I was just there last week giving a lecture on careers in the pharmaceutical industry. But I've lectured on headaches and other medical things, but some of these unique things I've been able to do. So I teach in the Guyana Family Medicine Residency Program. And I go in, and when I go in, I supervise residents as a preceptor. I lecture to them, what we're doing here on Zoom. I lecture via Zoom to the School of Pharmacy, to the family medicine residency program. And I collect and get resources. So we're able to support them with money to buy medical equipment, to subscribe to the American Academy of Family Physicians, Society of Teachers of Family Medicine for the faculty. So they have some of the resources necessary to train the next generation of physicians to help them. Because even though the country has a ton of money from oil, that doesn't seem to really trickle down to the residency, to the public health and preventive and primary care residencies. And so, friends of mine, myself, we put our money in and we distribute this. I'm working with the university right now to set up a student needy fund. So when kids, have somebody's car gets broken into or there's a puncture, they can get some money to help them tide them over. And so these are small things that we're looking to do. And then when I do go, we set up shop, whether in, the thing that I've been trying to do is to break down some of these barriers. So I go into Indo communities and Afro communities. I go to the Christian churches and the Muslim mosque and the Hindu temples, and we have community outreach. So we get a couple of docs, two, three, four docs, and we set up shop and we see patients for a day. And that is something that I do. So those are the three big things. And, we give out computers, we give out books, we try to help. And as I said, it's a small nonprofit set up in Pennsylvania, and I set that up. And that's really what I do. I've gone in once or twice a year now since 22, and I'll continue to do that as long as I'm able to. And I have a couple of dollars that I can share.
Awesome. Awesome. No, it's also impressive. I just hearing about your journey on all these fronts, it's just a really amazing story, and we came full circle. Obviously starting out in Guyana and you know, getting the initial idea that, hey, I want to do this medicine thing, and now bringing it back home. So it's very impressive. Final messages, Mr. While we have you today, anything public facing that's coming up that we should know about? Anything I missed while we have you, please take the
I think the
floor.
one thing we didn't talk about are the challenges faced by the public health and preventive medicine community
Sure,
with the new administration. And
absolutely.
this is not meant to bash the Trump administration. It is meant to say we need to work with them. And
Right.
as we need to work with them, what can we do together in the field of chronic diseases?
Yeah.
How can we get them to understand the value of vaccines? And if there are questions, we're happy to work and help to, we have a vaccine confidence campaign.
Right.
And also, how can we make sure that the staff and the people who are doing this important work get the support that they need? Look, it is easy to bash anybody. It requires thoughtful, hard work to find ways to collaborate. And we at the American College of Preventive Medicine want to do that. Of course, if somebody says something silly about vaccines not working and taking vitamin A in the midst of an epidemic, that is something we'll need to push back on. If you're going to cut the VA by tens of thousands of employees, how are the people who have served this country going to get the care that is a promise, a compact we have made with them? How is it that we're going to deal with epidemics when they happen? Do we have enough CDC people? And at the same time recognizing these opportunities. The Secretary Kennedy has talked about making America healthy again. Look, if we can reduce chronic disease, we would be in support of that. Can reduce the levels of overweight and obesity, we would love to work with you on that. There's something that is going on. It's still early. The college met yesterday or the day before with the new head of the funding for residencies. One of the things we didn't talk about was funding for residency programs. It is not the way that the residencies are funded in family medicine or surgery or internal medicine or pediatrics. It's funded separately to the
Mm.
measly tune of about $7-8 million, whereby the residency directors at Stony Brook, at Tulane, in San Diego, they have to go find money. So you
Mm.
have a lot of people want to join preventive medicine. The residency slots are approved by the ACGME. We have no money though. We have had residency programs closing because of a lack of money. Now, the Trump administration is looking to fundamentally change that we would love to work with them to say, how can we work to make sure that this vitally needed part of the American healthcare system is funded appropriately to bring people along? And if there's a last message for people, it's do the easy things even though they're hard. It's these easy things that will have the greatest impact on your longevity. And so I'll end with the three things: primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention. Get your vaccines, get the appropriate screenings that are needed. And if you have some type of a disease, get the requisite rehabilitation. Go to your cardiac rehab program if you've had a myocardial infarction. Take your pills for high cholesterol, hypertension, diabetes, etc. And then the six things that we talk about in lifestyle medicine: eat nutritious meals that are low in cholesterol, low in salt, low in fat. Get the 6 to 7 to 8 to 9 hours of sleep that you will need. Try to get more along the 7, 8, 9. Exercise 150 minutes, as it were, every week. It's less than 30 minutes a day. So if you walk away from your house for 15 minutes and you turn back 5 days a week, you're there. Make sure you're well connected with family and friends. We tend to get constrained as we get older. We have less connections. And the younger people are getting less connected because they're connected to their phones and their iPads and their computers and not to people. Try to stay connected. And then manage stress, whether it's meditation or prayer, whatever works for you is going to be the thing that you need to do. And then avoiding the substances, don't smoke alcohol, don't smoke tobacco or vaping, don't drink alcohol, don't use drugs, whether it's cocaine or other illicit drugs. You talked about benzodiazepines. Don't use drugs that will cause you harm. And then the other substances, avoid salt, cholesterol, which is meat and meat products, or things like milk and so on. Fat, because we're all too heavy, myself included. And salt. So these are the things: cholesterol, salt, fat. These are the things that we need to avoid. So three prevention things, the six lifestyle medicine. They're easy to say, they're harder to do. Let's get to it.
Awesome message. Awesome message. Um, I really enjoyed this. I enjoyed the stories, your journey. I'm rooting you and the team on, both at the college and at Cybin. And really, I look forward to seeing what the next couple of years bring as you continue to promote these programs, as you continue to get these interesting drugs to the clinic. So really, really impressive work. Again, for everybody that is going to be listening to this episode across the various podcast networks or watching on the YouTube channel, again, you've been spending time with Dr. Mirza Rahman, President, American College of Preventive Medicine, Senior Vice President of Patient Safety and Pharmacovigilance at Cybin, also co-founder and president, Guyanese Diaspora Charity, as well as adjunct associate professor at both Columbia University and the University of Guyana. Mirza, again, thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to talk to us on a range of topics today. Thank you for everything you do. And as we like to say on our show here, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow for millions of people out there via the type of work you do. Really an awesome story.
Thank you so much, Ira. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Really great having you.